Okay, ladies and gentlemen, very good evening. This is the date 5 of the November circular, where we have a different conference to learn about the transition process of the circular economy in the world. Tonight, we have the pleasure introducing Rangma Palawa, which we appreciate your contribution in this red. The topic of his presentation is the Nexus between climate change and circular economy, the perspective of the Paris Agreement. Mr. Ranga Palawa, concurrent works and expert climate change and international environmental policy. We think in the policy support component in Swiss Asia program. Swiss Asia is a program that focuses on promoting the circular economy and the sustainable consumptions and productions SCP in 43 countries in Asia, in Pacific and the Middle East. Prior to this is the worker attached the Commonwealth, the Secretary, Commonwealth Climate Finances Access Center and Climate Finance Advisors. He has more than 20 years professional experience in climate finances, climate change, and sustainable development. He obtained a basic degree in agriculture for the University Paranaira and Sri Lanka, and his master's degree in environment management from the University of Colombo. He is a past president and member of the Institute on Organization Development, EOD. Ranga is a well-known expert in the direct access modality of financial and accreditation of direct access entities for the adaptation funds, AFI, and the Green Climate Funds, GCF. Mr. Ranga, please, can you start with your presentation?
Thank you very much, Miguel, for the invitation. I think you all can see my presentation. Is it clear? Okay, right. Yeah, thank you very much again for the invitation. As I mentioned, my name is Ranga Palawa, and I'm working in the EU Switch Asia program, which is the program aiming at supporting circular economy transition and sustainable consumption and production in the Asia-Pacific region. So we are working in 43 countries in the Asia-Pacific and the Middle East. And I'm working there as the climate change expert. So we are within the policy support component, and we are supporting countries in different ways. One is a grant support, another one is through technical assistance for policy changes. So my presentation is basically coming through a recent webinar that we have hosted, which is on Nexus on climate change and circular economy. So I'm basically summarizing what we have discussed there, and I think everybody knows around it. So I'll briefly go through it. So in my presentation, I will cover these components, like mainly on climate change aspects, and give a bit of an introduction to what is Paris Agreement, what is happening, and the urgency towards what you call the net zero status, and the link between circular economy, sustainable consumption and production, and some of the way forward that we discussed there. Before I move into this, I will go to a little bit of a very basic science. I'm sorry if probably most of you know what is it, the science, but I think it's important that we have a bit of a refresh in our mind what's happening. So we live in a world which is what you call a closed system, right? It's a closed system, and we have what you call different spheres, cycles. We have the atmosphere, where we have all the air, and we have what you call the biosphere, where we have all the living component, plants and animals. And then we have the hydrosphere, which is represented in water. And then we have the geosphere or the lithosphere, where we have soil and all the minerals and stuff. So there are interactions among different spheres. That's how the world maintains its balance of it, right? um, the climate change is mainly causing because we have disturbed this balance, the interaction between the spheres. So these interactions and the interchanges among the spheres is powered or provided energy by the sunlight. So that's how so we are basically powered by the sun. But unfortunately, what has happened is the human interaction, also called what you call the development pathways, have changed the balance. We tend to disturb the biosphere a lot, the plants and the animals, the hydrosphere. And one of the significant changes what we have done is the fossil fuel usage. And fossil fuel is a sort of a carbon which is stored in the lithosphere or the geosphere, and we extract it, we burn it, get energy, and put carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So this has happened in a long period, in a greater rate or the frequency. So what has ultimately happened, we have changed the composition in the atmosphere, bad way. So the changes in the composition of the atmosphere has triggered to what we call the global warming, because more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere mean that it can trap the latent heat a lot. So the global warming has triggered to changes in the predicted long-standing climate patterns in the world drastically. So this is what we call climate change. And I don't want to explain what has happened with climate change and what's going to happen, but it's bad and created a lot of negative implications on the planet Earth. So this is the science that I mentioned. So if you get the atmosphere scientifically, we have nitrogen, the biggest composition in the atmosphere, and then we have oxygen, and then we have all the other what you call the greenhouse gases collectively, the carbon dioxide mainly, and little bit of traces of other gases. So each of these components has their own role. For example, oxygen, we need to live, breathe, everything. Nitrogen, what it does is basically the control oxygen, because otherwise it can burn anything in the world. So nitrogen is what you call the neutralizing, the burning ability of oxygen. And the carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases are created a kind of a glass wall around our atmosphere, and it traps heat. So it provides the thermal comfort for us, because otherwise what will happen during the daytime, we'll have exorbitant temperature, very high temperature where we can live. And during the night, we have freezing cold temperatures where we also can't live. But with the greenhouse gases, it trap heat and provide thermal comfort, irrespective of whether it's day or night. So now we have changed it. We have everything. So we have figured this out in early 1990s, or even before that. And the UN Environment Program under the United Nations, they have realized, okay, there's something happening in the atmosphere, and they have established what we call the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to do an assessment what this meant for us, this climate change meant for us. And their first assessment report came out in early 1990s. We call the first assessment report of IPCC. And it says, well, this is going to be a big issue, the climate change, and we need to have a global collective action towards tackling this challenge. And it triggered one of the Rio conventions, one of the 3 Rio conventions, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. UNFCCC is the UN body mandated to work on global collaboration towards solving the challenges arising from climate change, solving this issue. So this is how UNFCCC is working, and we all know how it happened. So during the IPCC first assessment report, what they said is that that this is in 1992. They said, well, the greenhouse gases are increasing in the atmosphere, and it posing a threat in the future, and it will have negative issues. So we need to move out from the fossil fuels and move into more renewable energy. So we will stop increasing the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. That was in 1992. But now we haven't done sufficiently, and we are facing a lot of other issues, and it's not a future threat anymore. Now we agreed it's a current threat. So UNFCCC is basically the agreement that has gone. This is a kind of a diagram that shows you how the important milestones that happen in the history. So it starts from the establishing of IPCC in 1980s, and establishing UNFCCC in 1990s, and then on the top, what you see, all the first assessment report, second assessment report, third assessment report, etc. And now we have our sixth assessment report too, and still we are grappling with this the particular issue. So in the Global Climate Cooperation, there are two agreements or protocols are quite important for us, and I will be discussing on those two a little. One is the Kyoto Protocol, which was established in 1995, and the other one is the Paris Agreement, which we agreed in 2015. I'll talk first about the Kyoto Protocol, and then I'll go to the Paris Agreement. Kyoto Protocol is agreement which provides a lot of responsibilities to main emitters, key emitters in the greenhouse gas emitters in the world to reduce their greenhouse gases. And we expected that it will stop the rapidly changing the climate and its challenges, but it didn't work. I'll show you how it goes. Before I move into the next one, I have a small video to show you, and then I will go into that. Just let me know whether you can see it. It will take about 2 minutes to watch this video, and we'll start the presentation soon after that. So this is about emissions happened from 1960. So you can see the country's emissions per year, different countries, and on the right-hand side column, you can see the countries having highest per capita emission. And also you can see some information. Just see how the total emission changes over the time. And you can see it's 1969 now, and it changes over the years. So you can see up to 2000, 2000, how it changes, and then we'll go back to the presentation. So probably have seen the video. I'm sorry. I think there's a problem that you couldn't hear the what I talked during the video. I'm sorry about it, but I just want to show that over the years the emissions have increased, and at the same time the countries who have done the major emissions in the world has changed due to the situation in the geopolitics, as well as in the process of development. For example, historically, you have seen United States of America has been one of the largest emitters in the world, and most of the what you call the developed countries have been the largest emitters in the world. But over the years, all the countries, irrespective of their size and the population and the level of development, have increased their emissions every year. That's the reality. We haven't got any evidence that any country has reduced their emissions over the time. No. So everyone has increased. But at the same time, we have seen the ranking has changed, and mostly it's the largely populated countries. For example, China, you have seen, as soon as they joined the World Trade Organization, when within 3 years they have overtaken USA in terms of emissions. And India, which was nowhere near the first 20 countries of the emissions, but have reached to the third level in no time. And some of the large countries, such as United Kingdom or collectively the European Union countries, have also increased emissions, but in terms of ranking, they have gone down from 1960s. It doesn't mean that everybody has done well, but everybody has done bad, but some people has done worse. Some countries have done worse. So overall, what has happened, two things. We have keep on increasing the greenhouse gas emissions, which causes climate change. And secondly, the number, the ranking of the countries of like the largest emission is also changed. So this is quite an important thing as far as the international the climate change is concerned, because it changed the approach and how we look at it in the climate change. For example, as I mentioned, the IPCC first assessment report, which happened in 1990, showed the climate change as a future threat. So our work should be exclusively focused on what you call climate change mitigation or reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's more of moving out of fossil fuel, increasing or moving towards renewable energy, etc. And if you look at the then time, 1990s, it's mainly the developed countries have been working on this, putting the emissions out. So, so large emitters have been putting pressure that they need to reduce the emissions. So that was in 1990 cases. But if you go to the what you call the second and the third assessment reports came from the IPCC, which came in 1996 and 2001 respectively, and the stance of their approach, the recommendation has changed drastically. They said, the scientists said, it's no longer a future threat. Climate change is not a future threat. It's happening now, and it's already affecting the humanity. So the climate change mitigation or prevention of climate change impacts or prevention of greenhouse gas emission won't work alone. And we need to accept that the things are changing and we need to adapt it accordingly. So the approach focused from the mitigation only or the greenhouse gas emission reduction only to mitigation plus adaptation. It's a new normal for the world. We need to accept that the things are changing. It's not going to be same as it used to be. So the adaptation focus came in that. But it's again changed the fourth and the fifth assessment reports, and even the sixth assessment report, saying that now the things are going even beyond adaptation. We can't adapt it anymore, and we need to, the climate change is creating what you call the losses and damages. It's come to dangerous level. So the mitigation and adaptation alone won't help us. We need to do mitigation, definitely, yes, as a long run. We need to adapt to the changes to the most possible extent we can. And at the same time, we need to prepare to manage the losses and damages it creates, losses and damages due to negative implication of climate change, such as sea level rise, for example. Frequent and intense extreme weather events like floods, landslides, droughts, cyclones, storms. It happens frequently and more intensively. So we need to create losses and damages, and we need to prepare to manage it. I think we all, irrespective of where we live, where we are coming from, we face these losses and damages create climate change. So that means gradually we have moved to a situation where we could have easily solved this problem, and to a situation where it's more complex and difficult to control the situation. Unfortunately, we are living in that particular generation. So we are so unfortunate into that. So Kyoto Protocol is an agreement or a protocol came out from the UNFCCC. It came in 1994. As I mentioned, in 1994 area, the UNFCCC was focusing mainly on the scientific foundations in the IPCC first assessment report. And it says we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by moving toward renewable energies. And if you look at who is producing more greenhouse gas emissions and who has more historical responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions, it's the economically developed countries. So this Kyoto Protocol came like through a few important things. They have given more responsibility to reduce greenhouse gas emission towards the developed countries. We call it common but differentiated responsibility principle. It's a common responsibility for all of us to reduce emissions. The differentiated means the developed countries who has more responsibility in terms of greenhouse gas emissions need to take more greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So it's about taking commitments by the developed countries to reduce greenhouse gases. And it has like 2 commitment period. In this protocol, countries agreed during the 2008 to 2012 period, they will reduce 5% of their emissions compared to 1990 levels. And they have the second commitment period, which runs for another 8 years from 2012 to 2020 to reduce further 18% of emissions against 1990 levels. So this is a drastic reduction. So cumulatively, we were talking about 23% reduction of emissions by the developed countries in the period of 12 years. So this was the agreement. And the developing countries who are not in a very strong economic position also took an agreement that they will start voluntarily to reduce it, but they have not taken what you call the legally binding targets under this. Because the least developed countries or the developing countries have very less responsibility compared with their historical greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the developing countries were not in the list that you have seen in the video. So that means they're not in that. So, so this is basically the Kyoto Protocol and how it works. And there are a lot of arguments around it because one is like, if you look at the top emitters by then, it's of course mainly the United States of America and most of the countries in the European Union, and some of the other developed countries like Japan, for example. But at the same time, we have seen the countries like China and India also in the list. But the argument is that even though they are emitting, they are large emitters by then, their historical emissions are less, and at the same time, they are grappling with some other developmental issues, so they need time. But there have a lot of criticism and argument saying that still they are increasing their emissions, etc. So I'll go back to it. So what happened is the Kyoto Protocol faces a lot of challenges. One is that some of the developing countries keep on increasing their emissions significantly. As I mentioned, two countries to name, China and India, but not only them, but most of the other countries were increasing their emissions. That's number one. Number two is that United States took a decision that they will not join the Kyoto Protocol. The largest emitter, based on the historical emissions, saying that it negatively impacts their economy. So the Senate didn't approve or ratify the Kyoto Protocol. So they decided they will move out from Kyoto Protocol. So it was like described in the language saying that it's like a wedding without a groom, right? And a lot of people grapple. And by the time we have seen some of the other countries keep on increasing the emissions, and the global emission composition has changed. You have seen in the video, and this is the findings that we have seen in the other ones as well. So we were in a challenge globally. We, in the sense, the entire humanity was in a challenge to find a common global solution for this. How to bring uh, all the countries into one unified agreement, because the climate change is a global issue, and you can't find a one single country solution for this, because we are sharing one world, one atmosphere. So you don't have a USA atmosphere and Sri Lanka atmosphere, or the Mexico atmosphere, or Ecuador atmosphere. It's one atmosphere, and we are sharing the world. So it needs a global solution. So the globally, the global policymakers were thinking how to find a solution for this, how to bring all the countries to an agreement. So there were different arguments around it. Different arguments in the sense different countries both brought their national priorities into it. I'll tell you for a few examples. For example, USA, their main argument was that if they start reducing emissions, it will affect their industries and their businesses and their economy badly. So the economy will go down, and it will affect the entire global economy. It can lead to recessions, for example. And what happened is, if the US economy goes down, it affects the other countries as well, because these countries are depending on exporting to US, and that's a problem. So US argument, or most of the developing country arguments, is that we have moved in a wrong direction, and to rectify that will take time. We need to do it smoothly, what you call the transition. But the other countries, the developing countries, you have not gone in that pathway long way. So you need to think of a new pathway. You can easily change, where change is very difficult for us, and it's a matter. And some countries, like oil producing country, they said, look, if you reduce the oil consumption and the fossil fuel consumption due to climate change, it will affect our economies, and there should be some sort of a compensation for them for that. And some people said, look, China and India, you are emitting a lot, and you have high population, and you need to do something quickly. You are no more developing country anymore, etc. And the China and India's argument is that, well, if you look at the historical emissions, we are not largest emitters. We are still small emitters. And if you look at the per capita emission, we are still not a large emitter. We are a small emitter. So you need to look at. So what happened basically is that due to national interests and priorities, they were blaming each other, and everybody wants others to do something rather than they do something. So this is the basic argument that we had at the international level. So then we wanted to have an agreement how we move to a global discussion. So rather than, the approach taken is that rather than setting a global target in terms of solving climate like we did in the Kyoto Protocol, why don't we just forget about other countries, other country priorities and their capabilities, whatever, but countries come together, look at their capacities, look at their priorities, and they said, okay, this is what we can do as a country to solve the global climate change issue in terms of emissions. So you decide nationally, what is your contribution to this problem-solving process? So this gave the birth of what you call the nationally determined contributions, on which the Paris Agreement has been created. So it's nationally determined contributions. It's a voluntary process of targets rather than targets are set at the international level. You set the targets voluntary at the ground level, and it's cumulatively coming to an agreement. And once in 5 years, the countries will revisit their contributions progressively or positively, and gradually we move to a process, what you call the net zero, or we come to whole plateauing the global carbon emissions. So that's the whole idea behind the Paris Agreement. So Paris Agreement is the new climate change protocol, came from the bottom-up approach, and the nationally determined contribution is the building block of Paris Agreement. So the NDCs it's a local process. The targets are nationally determined. All the countries are setting their targets nationally based on their capacities. And it set a pathway, what you call a gradual transformation. So there are 5-year cycles. All the countries update their climate change targets, ambition, progressively, and we move to net zero goals. And at the same time, it provides opportunity to mainstream climate change into development. For example, if one country think, okay, mining and construction is the largest contributor, and at the same time, it's the largest industry in their country. And if we put some targets into the mining and the construction industry, so that means they still have their development priorities, but they can mainstream climate change into their national development. So it gives an opportunity for the countries to mainstream climate change into development in whatever the industry. If it is significant, there's an ability. So all the industries can think how to work on it, etc. But there's a problem about the capacity and knowledge, because you set your own targets. And generally you set a target based on your capacity and knowledge. If you don't have the capacity, you tend to set a kind of a very low target. If you don't have knowledge, understanding, then you will set a kind of a low target. So since it's a bottom-up approach, and the discussions coming from the bottom, most of the time the target setting was depending on the capacity and knowledge. So this is one of the issues. And if you have more capacity, more knowledge, more understanding, that means we can have more ambitious targets. And also, the Paris Agreement suggests that there should be some support mechanisms to countries to have like more ambitious climate targets. So there are discussions around finance, providing finance towards the countries, providing technology and facilitate technology transfer towards the country. towards climate change, as well as capacity building support towards the country. So all these components have been discussed in Paris Agreement. It's a very comprehensive agreement, and at the moment, Paris Agreement governs the global climate change arena. So basically, all the climate action in the world is now based on the Paris Agreement, and all the countries are luckily still with the Paris Agreement. And we are thinking of achieving this state, what you call net zero. So what do you really mean by net zero? Net zero, there's a carbon cycle. There's a natural carbon cycle we have. We have the plants do photosynthesis using sunlight, and that absorbs all the carbon. And even the ocean algae and ocean can absorb carbon, or basically carbon dioxide is dissolved in water, and animals and stuff. And even in the soil, there's a long-standing carbon, including fossil fuels and stuff. And whenever we burn it, it goes to the carbon. So there's a natural carbon cycle. So net zero is that there's a way that the atmospheric carbon is stored, and at the same time, the other sources providing back to the atmosphere. If you come to a kind of a standstill level, so that means absorption is equal to release. So that is net zero. But we won't long time, it's going to be negative zero. That means we go below zero. So first target is to make sure that the global emissions is stagnated first, and then we can go down. So this is the net zero thing. So most of the countries now thinking net zero, but scientifically, scientists say that we need to go below net zero. Ideal situation, but it's challenging, but that's where I go. So now we come to the interesting component of the other side of the coin, which is circular economy. So I think you all are knowing about circular economy. You have been engaging in this, and you have been discussing around circular economy. And as I mentioned, our own program, Switch Asia, is also focusing on circular economy and sustainable consumption and production. What do you mean by circular economy? So you can come with different definitions, but simply is like how you have a circular process of material. So the material and resources are circulated rather than you go in a kind of a linear way. So we are trying to do better and more with less. And probably there's no waste, ideal situation, so that you reduce the pressure on the natural resource degradation, because we all depending on natural resources and material. And if we keep on extracting it from the natural environment, there are finite material, and we might not be able to do it. So definitely this material need to go in a kind of a circular thing. Basically, you close the loop. So this is circular. So circular economy also has a direct linkage and a contribution towards climate change as well, because there's a direct relationship between the material consumption and the greenhouse gas emission. So that means more material consumption means more emissions. More material consumption means that you need to do more processing, more extraction, and of course, in turn, it leads to more emissions. So if you increase the material efficiency, there's a high chance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions on the other side. So therefore, circular economy has a bigger role, bigger contribution towards the climate change and in the Paris Agreement as well. I am here taking some slides. I'm taking this from the International Resource Panel Global Resource Outlook. International Resource Panel is the equivalent to IPCC. It's a scientific body, but they're looking at the material side, the consumption. So they have their landmark report like IPCC's assessment reports, what you call the Global Resource Outlook. The new report will be out very soon. But according to their 2019 report, I'm taking some examples here, right? If you look at the material footprint by region, the right hand side one is that your footprint, right? By region and the tons per capita, and what you can see is that we have increased the material footprint, especially in the high and middle income countries, right? Because higher the income, we tend to have more comfortable lifestyles, and these lifestyles are often related to material consumption. So basically, higher the income, higher the material consumption. And you can see the footprint, the comparison from 1970 to 2017. It's staggering. We have seen actually the material consumption in the low-income countries have reduced the per capita, where in the lower middle-income countries, it has slightly increased from 3 to 5%. And in upper middle-income countries, it has increased to 8 to 17%. And the high-income countries is 20 to 27%. So you can see it's a kind of a drastic change, especially in the upper middle-income countries. The material consumption has gone up, right? And you can see the material extraction and the material productivity comparison from 1970 to 2017. You can see different materials, including biomass, fossil fuels, metal and non-metallic minerals. And all what we have seen, the interesting part here is that we have increased the material extraction significantly from 1970 to 2017, significantly, right? For example, it has gone from somewhere around 30,000 million metric tons to 90,000 million. Basically, we have tripled the extraction. But look at the productivity. The productivity, has increased for certain limit until 1990 based on this assessment, but then it become like stagnated. So that means we have stagnated in terms of productivity. And if we go in the same pathways, that means more material extraction, there will be a lot of pressure in the to the natural environment, and of course there's a chances of breaking down the system too, right? I'm taking another slide from the International Resource Panel. It's about the climate change impact of the material extraction and use, right? The extraction and processing of natural resource material cause significant climate impact. And also, it contributes to the other aspects like biodiversity as well as air pollution, etc. So there's a health impact as well. Basically, it contributes to what you call the triple planetary crisis, right? So the material extraction and processing actually contributes to 50% of global climate change impacts, if you look at the value chains, right? And at the same time, 90% of the global biodiversity loss and 1/3 of health impacts. So it has a significant impact, the material flow. And you can see the climate change impacts of different ones. For example, fossil fuel directly contribute to 16%. The non-metallic mineral extraction, it contributes 10% of global. Metal, 10%. Biomass, 17%. And household, 11%. So these are the climate impacts of material use. So if we move to circular economy, where it reduces the pressure on extraction and processing of natural resource material, so that means it contributes significantly towards the emissions, the biggest issue that we are trying to tackle in the climate change. So there's a direct relationship, basically, between climate change and circular economy in sustainable consumption and production. So this is the discussion. So this is the kind of a historic change, right? Just to give, sorry about my slide. There's a bit of a mix-up in the slides. Sorry about it, but I think it's very very obvious, right? So so this is the trends that we have seen, right? How the Human Development Indexes is expected to grow, and how the GG emissions is expected to grow, and the impacts on the others. And if you don't change this pattern, the impact is going to be significant, right? These are kind of a scenario modeling done by the International Resource Panel. I think it's still valid. It provides a lot of scientific background and food for thought for us to think how to link sustainable consumption and production, circular economy into the climate action, right? So what we need to do is basically the decoupling. I'm again taking some slides from the International Resource Panel. Decoupling is a word basically we use for both emissions as well as material, because resources, if we said, because at the moment, if we want to increase our well-being and the economic activity, higher the well-being, higher the resource use. That's the current scenario. So that means if we keep on increasing the well-being of people, economic and otherwise, there will be more pressure on the material extraction, material process, as well as greenhouse gas emission. So what we need to do is find out strategies how to decouple this, how to make sure the well-being is increasing, but at the same time, we have the same well-being with lesser resource over the time. So it's not an easy thing, but we're trying to find how to do this decoupling. So there are two types of decoupling. They're talking about what we call the well-being decoupling, the resource decoupling, and impact decoupling, right? So there are different strategies. What do the well-being decoupling is that we increase the service or the utility delivered per unit of resource use, basically increasing the efficiency. This is what we are talking about: sustainable consumption and production, and the underlying concept of circular economy too. The impact decoupling is that you increase the or reduce the pressure or the adverse impact created by use of a unit of resources. The economic well-being is basically you have the same economic output with the lesser amount of resource. So we are talking about efficiency. We are talking about reducing the pressure on the natural resources in terms of extraction and processing. So we need to find the strategies how to do, and all the entire world is now working on it. And same as our program. So I'm showing another slide. This is show the greenhouse gas emissions by sector. It's not mentioned as countries, but globally. If you can see the center part, the energy looks as the main contributor to climate change, greenhouse gas emissions. For example, energy contributes to 73% of emissions, and agriculture, forestry, and land use, basically land use including the changes that we do to land, right, is around 18%, and waste 3.2%, and industry is 5.2%. But if you go to kind of a sectoral breakdown, you can see different contributions to different things. For example, if you look at the residential buildings, the houses that you and me live it contributes around 10.9% of global emissions. So that if we change the efficiency and the way that we build our residential buildings in the future, of course, there's a high potential for us to reduce the emissions. And look at the commercial buildings, look at the fuel combustion and road transport, etc. So if you look at carefully, break down the aspects, the emissions are different. So so it shows the importance of looking at different sectors in a different perspective. For example, if a country is looking at improving their national determined contribution and ambition, they can go into different sectors. For example, let's say cement. It says industry generally provides nearly 6% of global emissions, but cement alone, it's a half of that. So cement industry can work around it. So this breakdown analysis is important, and this breakdown analysis by the country by will provide you more options and opportunities to consider how the circular economy and sustainable consumption and production can be linked towards the climate change, the goals, right? This is about, I'm taking another slide from the Global Green Building, the council, around how the infrastructure and urbanization can give them a shield from the upcoming and the current threat of climate change. And we need to look at the built environment in a kind of a different way. The infrastructure, the buildings, and all of the climate change can create a different impact on this. For example, it can create disasters, for example, heat islands, etc. And at the same time, it gives another view of using material, and therefore the built environment and the urban centers can contribute a lot towards the climate change prevention challenge. And I think I have gone a little quickly. I've reached out towards my the last slides. So this is the situation. This is the link between the climate change and the circular economy. So all the resources. So it's not a kind of a two different things. So we need to look at in the similar way. And when you come to resources, and of course in my presentation too, I was highlighting more of the climate change mitigation aspects, how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions using circular economy approaches or sustainable consumption and production approaches. And one might argue that I didn't mention anything around adaptation, but it also, the sustainable consumption and production and circular economy processes also provides a lot of resilience, a lot of adaptation perspective to climate change as well. One straightforward example is around water efficiency. We know water has become a center part of the climate change adaptation as far as the agriculture and the human needs are concerned. And the water resources have become challenging with climate change due to droughts and increasing global temperatures. So water use efficiency is, of course, a sustainable consumption and production aspect, and it can contribute really good or really well towards the adaptation strategies as well. And the industries and businesses will be more resilient with the circular economy processes. I think it's an established argument. So you are depending on circular material, and you are not depending more on a natural material in terms of the extraction and stuff. So that means your potential supply chain, the value chain disruption is lesser when you adopt circular economy processes. So there are adaptation benefits as well. So one of the things that we need to discuss are, okay, so this is the scientific argument. So there is a very scientifically proven interlinkage between climate change and circular economy. So why we are not moving there? What are the challenges? So we need to look at this. Number one is the challenge is that understanding our level of ambition. So level of ambition comes from the countries based on the level of confidence they have on one aspect. So one of the biggest challenge we have is that, yes, directly increasing the level of ambitions of the country in terms of the climate, in terms of the circular economy. But for that, we need to have properly established scientific evidences, data, and information available with them so they can make informed decision and they feel confident about that we can reach this ambition. So ambition always comes from the confidence. So building confidence on that we can do this is quite important. So this is where we need to get all the stakeholders around. It's not only the government, it's not only the private sector, it's not only the civil society. All people need to have this understanding, and that can fuel and trigger the ambition, the confidence that you have that we can do this. So rising level of ambition is one of the biggest challenge we have, and at the same time, there are a lot of solutions towards that. The other one, another challenge that we have seen around the world is the lack of policy cohesion. So in most of the in the decision-making systems, in the governance structures, not only in the countries, even it can be in the industries, the decisions and the policy decisions are taken in a little bit of a fragmented way. We have different departments, we have different units, we have different ministries, for example, and they make policies on different matters. But if you look at some of the policies, there's no kind of a linkage, cohesion. And having more policy cohesion can trigger the linkage. We can go into more synergetic and more co-benefits towards that. One of the examples we are looking at this is sustainable consumption and production and NDCs. National determined contribution is the one area where the country is declaring their climate priorities, climate action. And as I mentioned, the countries also have their sustainable consumption and production targets, SDG 12, for example. So we are looking at the overlap between these two, and we have found, of course, there's a high potential that you can have more cohesion between this. You can reflect most of your sustainable consumption and production target, SCP targets, within their national determined contribution, and vice versa. Some of the climate aspects can be considered in the SCP aspects as well. So having more policy cohesion, the policies are looking at the priorities of each other, basically moved out from the siloed approach is quite important, and that can benefit. So we, as a program, we're trying to think of how to enhance this policy cohesion between climate and SCP. And that's a challenge. And at the same time, there are solutions as well. And the countries need to look into this, even the businesses. Technology plays a big role. For example, some of the technologies can be adapted, which can promote more efficiency to your process, and of course climate benefits. So we know new technologies are coming up and people are adapting in different ways, and of course it contributes a lot. For example, let's take the ICT, information and communication technologies. So ICT have provided a great opportunity to enhance the efficiency and work on it, and it's been adopted. But at the same time, the technology transfer is not an easy thing. There are a lot of barriers for technology transfers, including cost and the intellectual property rights, etc. So if more technologies are available, that's one. So that it can enhance your climate sensitivity, the climate contribution, as well as circular economy. On the other hand, we have another challenge, that is the level of existing technology. With the existing technology, we can achieve certain things, but we need to be a little more ambitious, and we need to look at new innovations as well. So the innovations in terms of technology is quite important. How to trigger the innovation ecosystems to be in line with uh, the climate the priorities and the circular economy priorities. And there are a lot of activities happening, and that's quite encouraging, but we need to do more. But we see technology as one domain, is as a barrier for the countries to go for more climate and circularity actions. Investment is another issue. We have seen one of the biggest issue for the developing countries is a lack of finance, or the cost of finance to adopt climate and circular activities. So this is a problem, and the globally there's a lot of fight to make sure that the countries have access for more concessional finance to face the climate change challenges. And we see under the UNFCCC, there's a climate mechanism, and new funds are coming up, like the Green Climate Fund and some other dedicated fund like climate investment funds, etc. So that the funds are coming up. And we have also seen the multilateral development banks have come to one single agreement saying that we are aligning our investments to the Paris Agreement. So that's a good thing. So that means more things are coming up. But at the same time, the two aspects of finance is important. Number one is concessionality. It's not like the debt financing the country is looking at, but more concessional finance, which will trigger towards the transition. The second one is around enhanced capacity, because I mentioned more capacity, more understanding, more readiness in the system means you can absorb more finance, and the plans are available. So there should be some sort of a readiness support as well, where you prepare the countries to access more finance. So now there are a lot of readiness support. The countries get finance to prepare themselves to face climate change challenges. So that's important. So what I want to say is that there are challenges, but at the same time, there are some solutions also being triggered out, and that's quite encouraging. So I think that's my last slide, Miguel. So I've taken a little over 1 hour for my presentation. So I would like to open up it for the discussion, and we can move into the discussion. So yeah, Miguel, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for you explain the conference. Please, one question: if the COP 2028 is a song celebrity in this November, what is the opinion in relation the decision agreement in this event for you?
Thanks, Miguel. It's an important question. I think the Conference of Parties of UNFCCC, COP 28 is very important from my perspective in different aspects. Number one is that we are completing the process what we call the global stocktake, the GST. The global stocktake is around the review of how far we have moved in terms of implementing the Paris Agreement, the first NDC cycle. So we have done NDCs and probably updated in 2020 and 2025. We need to enhance it in the second cycle. So we are halfway through the first cycle, and we're going to review, okay, how far we have moved ahead. And the first draft report has been out. Unfortunately, that report is not very encouraging, I would say. So as the global leaders, the policymakers need to make a decision based on the global stocktake okay, how we need to enhance our aspects. So the global stocktake is an important milestone. And at the same time, there's another discussion going on around what we call the new collective quantified goal on climate finance in CQG. The goal, because we had a goal of having $100 billion a year climate finance as a basis when we start the Paris Agreement. But now the world has changed and things have changed, and we need to move ahead, and we need to understand, okay, what is our new collective goal, basically. So there are a lot of discussions happen. Of course, that goal will be agreed in the next COP, but this COP will provide the basis for that decision that we are going to make in next year. So this is important from my perspective, from circular economy and climate change. But other than that, there are other two important discussions goals happen, because during this COP we need to agree the modality or operationalizing the new fund called the Loss and Damage Fund, which was a kind of a hard-fought thing for a long time. So that discussion will also happen, and we need to make sure that it happens. But the most important thing is that, as I mentioned, the COP is just an event where the global leaders coming and making decision, but most important things happening in between the COPs. That's where the countries and the stakeholders need to look at it and then do all the ground level activities. So the COP is giving you some sort of a direction where you need to go, but actual journey towards that direction need to happen in between the COPs. But one important thing that I need to mention, the next NDC enhancement cycle need to happen in 2025. The countries need to come up with their new climate targets by then. So it's happening in 2025. But as I mentioned in my challenges, we need to come to kind of an ambitious targets. And it's a national and a global target. And the stakeholder engagement in this process is quite important. And you need to make sure that you engage in the process, understand the process, and you identify your role as a stakeholder in this process. It goes to all the businesses, all the industries as well. For example, industries, let's take the private sector. The governments make the commitments as NDCs in at the international level. And the NDCs gives you two things. It gives you your level of ambition and the goal, and at the same time, it provide a kind of a baseline where you need external and internal support and finance towards that. So say your industry, let's take let's take it as textile, for example. Let's take it as a tourism, for example. What is your industry's contribution to NDCs or the climate change? So if you got some targets for your sectors in the NDCs, what are the benefits that you can take? What kind of contributions you can make? And at the same time, the global decisions, we see the global policy cohesion is now happening because we are in a desperate situation. We need to transform quickly to a new system as soon as possible. So we have been forced to do that. So rather than taking the Paris Agreement or the climate change decisions and the NDCs by a surprise, the engagement is quite important. So you understand what is your role and what potential work that you can do as an industry, as a group, as a sector to this. So this engagement is quite important. So I think the stakeholder engagement towards the next NDC enhancement is quite crucial. So whatever the decision make in the COP28 going to be very important for you to understand what's your process towards NDC update in 2025. So that's my thoughts about it.
It's okay. One question more, please. what are the action, the big impact for the countries that receive financial for the climate change?
Yeah, finance, as I mentioned, finance is a crucial aspect of it. And as I mentioned, one important aspect is not the finance, but it should be concessional as well. Because if you don't get concessional finance, you won't trigger the transformation as quickly as possible, because we need to change to a system which is not the business as usual situation. So we need to change fast. If you want to change fast, you need to make sure that the finance gives you kind of an incentive to make that fast. So there are a few things that is happening now. Green Climate Fund is one of the largest dedicated climate funds in the world, is providing finances. And we see there are new replenishment processes going on. So that means they are getting more capital into their finances, and we see countries coming up and pledging their contribution to this fund. This is very encouraging. But at the same time, the access from the Green Climate Fund, the process, there are a lot of criticism around the delays and the capacities and the standards required for that, because they follow what you call the enhanced direct access modality. So you need accredited entities to access financing. So to access Green Climate Finance, I think the countries need to actively look into get more finances through the funding, because there are some funding available, and we see countries are still getting very little. Different processes, but still opportunity is there. So I encourage to look at it. But at the same time, I'm repeating the same thing. We have seen most of the other donors, including the multilateral development banks, have aligned their priorities to the Paris Agreement. So that means, irrespective of the donor or the financier, they're looking at certain aspects of your investment or of your fund request, whether that is contributing to the Paris Agreement. So that means the countries, the businesses, the industries, the institutions who are expecting to benefit from climate finance must make sure that their proposals, their actions, and their pathways are in line with Paris Agreement and the climate priorities. If you don't have climate priorities in your investment plans, that means it's going to be very difficult for you to access finance, and at the same time, it's going to be very costly. So, number one thing for access climate finance is that you need to make sure that you mainstream climate change into your plans and strategies. That's number one. It's not just a proposal that will make you, but you need to show that your overall pathway, strategy, the direction, it's toward climate resilience and low carbon development. That is utmost important. And this is where you need to start from the scratch, the awareness, looking at strategically and enhancement. At the same time, you need to make sure that it is in line with the national priorities. That's what I said. If you want to get more climate finance, you need to make sure the sectors and the strategies that for you are looking at investment is reflected in the national priorities. So it's a kind of a cycle. NDC process is quite important. You may make sure that the areas are reflected in the NDCs and the national priorities, and then it's easy for you to think how it can contribute to your business strategy and the country and reflect in it, and then you can move into finance. And at the same time, there's a competition as well. But my final thing is that there's a lot of finance available, and most of the finance sources are now narrowing down their perspective to Paris Agreement alignment. So that's quite important. Miguel, I see a question in the chat as well. Shall I take it? It says, Gabriel asked, what role of the bioplastic and other bio-based material play in the shift away from non-renewable materials for packaging and products? Yes, packaging and products is a big one, and the plastics is also a big one in the in terms of emissions. And if you look at the life cycle emissions from the plastics is huge. So moving away from plastics, not merely recycling, but moving away from plastics and coming up with some sort of non or renewable materials as a substitute. Of course, it has a lot of impact on climate change as well. And probably you all know that there are discussions going on at the moment to have a global plastic treaty to tackle the plastics pollution as a global priority. So it's going to be a new convention. So there's at the moment they're negotiating on what should be that global treaty look like through International Negotiation Committee. And that, of course, look at the substitutes for plastics as well. That's one aspect, but they will look at the entire the life cycle of plastics into this, and that's quite important. And we see a lot of connections of that with the circular economy and the climate change as well. And our program as Switch Asia, we are providing technical assistance to the countries, those who are engaged in the INC negotiation process with technical expertise. So just to say that it's important, I do agree, and there are some discussions around it as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Once again, we appreciate Mr. Ranga contribution in the network. I also all participate. I finished the conference. Thank you very much, Ranga.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thanks for the invitation, and wish you all the very best. And good night for you all.
Good night, all participate. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, bye.